Hashem says to Moshe to tell Yeshua that as the one who will lead the conquest of Canaan, Hashem said he must go before them. It's not he sends the people to battle and he's behind the lines. He must lead them into battle. It's Moshe led them into battle. He had Sichor and Og, the giants. So he must, and where do we find that he did not lead them into battle? Because we find by Ai, there were 36 casualties, and Yeshua was prostrating himself on his face. And Hashem says to Yeshua, Kum, rise and go. That the reason why this happened is because you weren't there in the front lines. You were behind the lines. So we asked the question. It says explicitly in the Navi that because Ochon had benefited, had taken the spoils of Yericho, that's why there was this tragedy, this Choti Yisrael. So it's not Hashem says Yeshua, rise and go. And meaning, and if you do that, this tragedy won't repeat itself. That's what we asked. So what we said was that, Harbi Shluchim Mamokim. Hashem has many ways to bring about retribution. And if there's Midas Rachmin in its place, it doesn't have to manifest itself that way. Even though Ochad took from the spoils of Yericho, we didn't have to suffer a loss of 36 casualties. Could have been somehow addressed differently. But because he didn't go, therefore, the protocol which should have been in place was not. Therefore, as a result of Choti Yisrael, because they had sinned, as a result of the Ochad taking of the spoils of Yericho, that's why it happened. So I said, where do we find such a thing? We find this halacha that we mentioned, a Kohen Gadol, that if somebody kills inadvertently, so the murderer has to stay in the Ir Miklat, the city of refuge, Ados Kohen Gadol. Why the Kohen Gadol? Why until he passes away? Because if he would have prayed that he should have, this tragedy wouldn't have happened. So therefore, there's a level of liability to the Kohen Gadol. Therefore, the release of the person, the Ir Miklat, is contingent on the death of the Kohen Gadol. So the Gemara speaks about an interesting case. What happens if the person commits murder, kills, when one Kohen Gadol is alive, and then before the Bezdin gives a ruling that he killed B'shogeg, the Kohen Gadol dies. And before they gave the psak, before they gave the ruling, the verdict, they appointed a new Kohen Gadol. Even in that case, we say that that person, and it was the ruling was he killed B'shogeg. He has to go to the Ir Miklat. He has to stay in the Ir Miklat until the second Kohen Gadol passes away. So the Gemara asks, but the tragedy happened under the watch of the first Kohen Gadol, not the second Kohen Gadol. So why is there liability to the second Kohen Gadol? That's the first question in Makos. Is there any expertise, area of expertise? So our answer is because he could have prayed, he could have been mispalel for Rachmim, and he could have been found innocent. He didn't have to be found guilty. So because he was found guilty and not innocent, therefore he failed on his watch. I mean, here we're talking about the tragedy took place under the watch of the first Kohen Gadol. But because since the verdict wasn't given and didn't have to be guilty, it could have been innocent and he would have been released, that's considered he failed. But the question is, but in reality, he killed. He did kill. So we said many times, the whole question of capital punishment, that there's always an element of human error, has no relevance to a Sanhedrin. Why? Because the Gemara tells us in Sanhedrin that whenever the Sanhedrin rules in a capital crime, any halacha, it says Elokim nitzav daskel. That if you meet all the criteria of what a Sanhedrin is, the Dayanim they see through the eyes of Hashem. Hashem convenes together with the Bezdin. So therefore, even though he may have been found, he may be innocent regarding this particular issue, but factually Hashem wants him to die, whether it's through skila, whatever the death penalty may be. That's Hashem's will. as the Gemara tells us, today we have no Sanhedrin. The person is deserving of skila. He falls off a rooftop. He's deserving of what? Of chenek. He drowns. That's chenek, strangulation, asphyxiation. That's what it is. So the same thing over here. If in fact the midas harachim would be in place, he would have been found innocent. So why is he now incarcerated for the rest of his life? Because the second Kohen Gadol didn't pray. But the man is guilty. What do you mean should be innocent? No. That the Bezdin rules Chayov, that's what midas harachim wasn't. But he has to be atoned. Hashem has many ways that a person can be atoned. He didn't have to what? The verdict didn't have to be guilty, he could have been innocent. So we see from here that even though Ochad may have benefited from the spoils of Yericho, it didn't have to manifest itself that way. You didn't have to have 36 casualties. But because Yeshua did not lead them into battle, and he failed in that context, therefore, we didn't make Rachmim, therefore we had the 36 casualties. Okay. If you heed these mishpotim, these laws, ushmartem, v'asismosam, you study them as we had in the previous parsha, and you retain them and you actualize them. Hashem will uphold the covenant. Rashi, the Torah could have said, "Voyo im tishmun." What's the word akev? Famous Chazal. What's akev? Akev normally means what? Akev is a heel. What does this have to do with a heel? If mitzvahs akalos she'odam dosh v'akev tishmun. If the mitzvahs that one normally tramples on his heel, under his foot, I mean, he doesn't value it. That's why they're neglected. V'shomer Hashem yishmalchach techoso. That if one even observes, even the mitzvahs that one normally neglects, which is the equivalent of treading on them, not noticing them, if even those you keep, v'shomer Hashem yishmalchach techoso, he will keep his promise. And we'll see in a moment to the nth degree. And what is that? Vayevacho. He will love you, ve'racho. He will bless you, ve'becho. He will increase your number. Uveirach prividnecho, upri admostecho. He will bless the fruit of your womb, the fruit of your land, the gontcho, tziroscho v'tzirecho, the grain, the wine, the oil, shkara lofecho, asher sonecho, the offspring of your flocks, of your herds, and your flocks. If you observe even the mitzvahs that one normally neglects, even those, Hashem will keep the covenant to the nth degree. Well, probably. But it's only if you keep even the mitzvahs that one normally neglects. Then, and it keeps going. You'll be blessed, more blessed than all the nations. There will not be a man or woman that's barren or non-fertile, and among your animals. And it keeps going. Hashem will remove from you all illness, all the diseases of that in Egypt, which you're aware of because you saw them during the Makos. It was accompanied with all kinds of illnesses. He will not allow them to come upon you. To place them among your enemies. You're going to be immune of all these illnesses and these diseases. Okay? Before we go further. But all this is only going to be if Ekev Tishmun. If you observe even the mitzvahs Shadam Dosh Ba'Kevav. that even you're so meticulous, even mitzvahs that a person normally neglects, you observe them, then you merit the ultimate. What is it all about? Is it why? Because the mitzvah is a mitzvah, and just as you find, God forbid, a corpse, Jewish person, his remains are unattended, cover that mess. Even a Kohen Gadol, even a Nazir who's not permitted to contaminate even to his seven closest relatives, he contaminates himself. Same idea. It's a mitzvah. You have a mitzvah which is important, which is vital to existence. If you even keep them, which the system works perfectly, then the whole system works perfectly. But if you don't observe those mitzvahs, which people normally neglect, then it's not going to happen as it's supposed to happen. That's the Akev. That if you want to merit the ultimate, you have to even observe even something which is normally neglected. By Bikurim and by in the third year, going into the fourth year sabbatical cycle, there's a mitzvah of Vidu Meiser, that a person has Truma and Meiser, all the various tithes that he has to distribute. If he didn't distribute him, he has to distribute him by the fourth year. The Kohen, the Levi, the poor person, everybody has to receive theirs. And after we fulfill that, we say a tefillah, a bakosha. We ask Hashem, supplicate Hashem, Hashkifa B'mot Kodsho, Uveirach Esamcho Yisrael. Hashkifa, you should gaze from your heavenly abode and bless Klal Yisrael with all kinds of bounty. So over there, Rashi cites the Chazal. Why is the term Hashkifa, Lashkif? So Rashi over there cites the Medrash. Where do we find the term Hashkifa? When the Malachim went to destroy Sodom, it's about Yashkifa Apnei Sodom. They gazed upon Sodom. And Rashi says over there, whenever it says the term Yashkif is mentioned, gazing, it's always Midas Adin. It's Midas Adin. However, over here, it's using the same term, Hashkifa no, to tell us that if one gives matnas kuna, matnas aniyim, if you give the tithes, which is charity, and in this area, it's mahapich midas adil mitzvah rachmi. It overturns the attribute of din to rachmi. That's why the Torah uses that terminology, hashkifa. Now, we explained why. Why is that term used? Why is matnas aniyim, giving the tithe to the poor man? Why doesn't the person give tithe to a poor man? You neglect him. Person doesn't give it tzedakah. See a poor man who truly needs, and you just gloss over him because you don't feel his need. Therefore, as a result, but if you would gaze and realize what his issue is, you would give him, you would help him. So, what is midas adin? Midas adin it's an evaluation which is so precise that nothing goes unseen, and therefore the record is audited. Hashem audited even the smallest infraction, if there's midas adin. And that's why nobody's perfect enough. If chas v'sholom is midas adin, that's good. They gazed upon stone. That's midas adin. Midas adin is nothing goes unseen. Nothing ever goes unseen, but in terms of prosecution. So if you go and use that gazing to notice somebody's need in the positive, that averts the midas adin, that overturns midas adin, should midas arachmin. That's the concept. Now, what's the reason why there's midas adin? Because the balance gets so off balance that Hashem can't shut out the prosecutor any longer. And the smallest infraction on the record is prosecuted. That's hashkifa. That's what it is. What about if you go and you value even the mitzvah that people neglect? Even that. In terms, everybody should really receive what Hashem wants to give us, bounty. But why doesn't he give us bounty? Because we fall short of where we should be at. But so therefore, because the evaluation is so exact, it doesn't allow that what Hashem would want to give us, that's the impediment. But what about if we also have hashkifa? That even the mitzvah that people normally neglect, we don't neglect. We're very precise in doing even the mitzvah, which normally one naturally glosses over, and we don't gloss over. That's a midah keneged midah. Just as hashkifa, matnas aniyim overturns the midah sadim yisa rachmim, identically, when you notice and address even the mitzvah kala that people neglect, and even that you value, that averts the midas adin, and as a result of that, Hashem releases the bracha as He wants to release, and there's no obstruction to deny you what He would want to give us and what we need. That's what I was thinking. Right, we've said in the past, we say in Pirkei Avos, I'll take mitzvah kala. There should be no mitzvah kala beinecha. You should pursue a seemingly ordinary mitzvah as a more severe mitzvah. Why? Because you don't know the innate value of a mitzvah. Although based on your evaluation system, it seems to be insignificant, but factually, you don't know the innate value of a mitzvah. Therefore, you should pursue a mitzvah kala as a chamura, because you don't know the innate value. I told the story last week. Rav Steinman, every day he used to give 10 grush. That's the smallest denomination in the Israeli currency, in memory of the 6 million Kedoshim who perished during the Holocaust. So somebody asked him, and he had a very, very significant part of his family perished in the Holocaust. So they asked him, well, you're putting the tzedakah box. It hardly has any value. What could you buy with 10 grush? So he used to say, factually, it is tzedakah. And if you understand the innate value of the mitzvah of giving tzedakah, that's what it's about. It's not based only upon the buying power of what you put in that box, but if it's classified as the mitzvah of tzedakah, it has it's beyond our capacity to even evaluate what the innate value of that mitzvah is. Therefore, I do this mitzvah in memory of the 6 million kedoshim. That's what he said. That's how mitzvah. That's what it's about. Now, why does a person go and neglect mitzvahs? In life, everything has a cost factor. You're giving up something for something else. Something which, according to your understanding, has greater value, you say it's worth it. Violating Shabbos chas v'sholem, you're not going to carry a heavy penalty. But something which you see as a lesser value, you're not as careful. So why do we differentiate between the more and the less? Whose yardstick are you using? You're using the human yardstick. The human yardstick has no relevance to Hashem's Torah. Because if Hashem says you have to put on tefillin, you have to give tzedakah, and you have to observe Yom Kippur, and you have to do tshuva, there is no difference between any of this. Every mitzvah, positive, negative, you're doing because Hashem wants you to do it. So why are you picking and choosing? If Hashem says they're all equally important to me because I want you to do my will, how do you have a right to pick and choose? You're totally off base. If even the mitzvahs that you neglect, you observe, what does that mean? The reason why you're doing it is because it's the will of Hashem. So if that's the case, at what level are you serving Hashem? Not based on you're not coming from your vantage point, you come from His vantage point. When you serve Him based on His vantage point, that's Akev. And what's the proof of the pudding? That even things that people normally neglect, you don't neglect. Why don't you neglect them? Because there's no such thing as less important or more important. Everything is as important because everything's the will of Hashem. So then Hashem's, if that's the case, then of course you deserve everything. Hashem will uphold the bris and the chesed, and He will love you, and the bounty is unlimited. But if you pick and choose, which you're not doing it for God, you're doing it for yourself. And what's the proof of the pudding? You do it for yourself. Why are you giving this evaluation system? Has nothing to do with what you think or what you don't think. It's what he wants. Automatically, that's an infringement of Lishma. That's not L'Shem Shemayim. If you do something L'Shem Shemayim, for the sake of God, there's no difference between mitzvah chamur and mitzvah kala. They're all the same. But if you go and you base something upon the value, as much Lishma as you want, it's not Lishma. Because why is this Lishma and something else not Lishma? We're not saying you're not doing this Lishma, but the general mindset is not you're doing everything for the sake of God. There's a little bit of your own sake, because based on your valuation, this is worthwhile the cost factor, and the other area, it's not worthwhile the cost factor. Because if it was, you wouldn't differentiate between what's less and more. Everything has the same level of value. The parsha. Voye Ekev. Seshomar HaKosov, Kosopos Tilim. Loma Iro Bimeiro. Why do I be fearful in the days of Raw? Meaning the days where my record is going to be audited. Avon Akevi Yusubeni. The sins of my heels will encircle me. These are words of David HaMelech. Avon Akeva Yusubeni. Yisborach Shmo Shel Kodesh Baruch Hu Shenosu Torah Yisrael. Hashem gave Torah to Klal Yisrael Sheish Me'os Shlush Esrei Mitzvos, which contains 613 mitzvos. Yesh Behen Kalos v'Chamuros, and they're less important, more stringent. There are many mitzvahs kalos which people don't even pay attention to. They throw them under their heels. Why? Because they're not that important. David was concerned on the day of judgment. He says, I'm not concerned that I didn't observe the more severe mitzvahs in the Torah. Because of course, was the chamuros, because they're more severe. Mimani misyori, what I am concerned about. Mina mitzvahs hakalos, the mitzvah shema varti alchspein, because I may have transgressed one of the mitzvahs kalos. Imosisi lo asisi. If I did them, if I didn't do it, and what is my concern? I'm concerned if I didn't do it. The reason is because it was kala. That's why I neglected it. Because I misvalued. I didn't value it as I should have. And you commanded us that you have to be as careful of the mitzvah kala as a chamura. Therefore, he says, I'm concerned about the Meirah, the day of judgment, because maybe the sins of my heel will encircle me. So what does that mean? David says, let's say a person once in his lifetime, he does things lishma, and a mitzvah kala, for some reason, he didn't do it properly. He neglected it. What does that say? Mitzvah chamor, he never neglected. Why did you neglect the mitzvah kala? You know what the answer is? Because you use your own yardstick to make that evaluation. Because why did you neglect the mitzvah chamura? Mitzvah chamura because carries a different level of liability. Mitzvah kala doesn't. So that was David said, even if he failed once, what's going to be the prosecution against him? If you're so-called the chassid and you do everything, lishma, so how do you differentiate between mitzvah kala and mitzvah chamura? Therefore, David says, I may have failed when I'm concerned is mitzvah kala. Not that David would ever fail mitzvah kala, but if he did, why in mitzvah kala did he fail not on mitzvah chamura? The answer is because that indicates that as much as you believe you do something lishma, you're doing everything for the sake of God. Here it's clearly you did it for your own sake. Because otherwise you wouldn't have made the differentiation between the mitzvah kala and mitzvah chamura, because they're all as important, because it's all the will of Hashem that you should observe every one of them. As much as we want to convince ourselves we're doing well, and we are doing well, but it's all on a bell curve. You do put on tefillin, you put it on the shema. But why do you have such kavanah when you put on tefillin? And not when you do something else? The answer is tefillin represents something this. What do you mean? They're all as important. There's a famous story of the Chofetz Chaim. The Chofetz Chaim, every Shabbos, would send out a talmud of his, I told the story in the past, to these little villages which didn't have a rabbi. And the people weren't that learned. And they would be the rabbi for the Shabbos, and he would say Dvar Torah, and he would actually give a musar in a certain way to inform them that they're failing at a certain level because they weren't learning. One student comes back and he says to Chavetz says, "How did it go? Tell me what happened." He says, they ran me out of town on a rail. Literally, they're ready to stone him. I will never ever go back to that community. He says, "Tell me what happened." He says, "I spoke about Shabbos, and I spoke about Shabbos with fire and brimstone. Fire and brimstone. What's going to happen to them? So on and so forth." And when they heard the way I spoke to them, they literally threw me out of my head at the end of Shabbos, rather than being appreciative, because they didn't pay for this. They didn't compensate them financially. So Chavetz Chaim says, "I want to ask you a question. You're supposed to serve Hashem with ava, with love. You do mitzvah with love, with softness. When you put on your tefillin, do you put on your tefillin with fire and brimstone? So why, when you tell them about Shabbos or the mitzvah, where they don't know any better, why do you need fire and brimstone? You're the one who's guilty. They're not guilty. You have no right to speak to them as you spoke to them. So again, one mitzvah you do with compassion, with feeling, with love. Other one you don't. Why do we make differentiations? The answer is because this is more important, that's less important. They're all important. It's a similar concept. And then the Chavetz Chaim saw them all the same. Why do I want to correct and bring my fellow Jew back on track? It's obviously so. But if it's not because it's because you want to tell them what to do. If that's the case, if they're not doing what you want, if that means your ego is ego-driven. If you're ego-driven and they don't toe the line as you think they should toe the line, then you get upset. That's fire and brimstone. So they say, "You think you're gonna reign in on us? You're gonna dominate us? You're gonna lord over us? You're not gonna lord over us. You're out of here." That's the difference. But it all goes back. This is Avo that Kevi Subeni. That's what David was concerned. They're more precious or more desirable than gold, and even the most precious gold. And your servant is meticulously careful of them. Look to what degree David is esteeming the words of Torah. He says it's more desirable than gold and even the most precious gold. That was the way he innately evaluated Torah. Among all grain, flour, with the wheat flour, which has been actually had the bran removed from it, it's the best quality flour. Shitzofa bepeh. Literally, when you put it in your mouth, it doesn't get stuck to your mouth. It like floats in your mouth. The divrei Torah chavim menu, the most delectable type of flour which one puts in his mouth. Torah even surpasses that. Divrei Torah chavim menu shnema umsukim dvash no besufim. The words of Torah are sweeter than honey, v'no besufim. Meaning the ultimate sweetness of honey. Amar Chanina in Tomash and Komini Mashkin Besuk min advash. We say there's no liquid which is sweeter than honey. The divrei Torah Besuk mikulan, and Torah is even sweeter than that. So what was Hashem saying to Hashem? Bono lomim Shema b'nei she besukin midvash basati ben chashuv sholom. Meaning, if a person we had earlier, when the Jews that went to war and they took the spoils, they took so much spoils, they started to, why it's called bizo. Spoils are called, two words for spoils of war, shalol and bizo. What does bizo mean? Bizoyo. when a person goes and accumulates tremendous amount of spoils, after a while you go and you don't value something which has value because of the unlimited amount of spoils that you have. So you actually you underestimate and you don't treat the value as for its value. She says maybe because it's so sweet, afterward you get disgusted. You have enough. You can, if you over eat something too sweet, eventually it causes you to regurgitate. So maybe because it's so sweet, therefore I don't value it, and I had enough of it. Mitzvahs kalos lefichach. He says, therefore, because I've never been satisfied, and even though I have all what I have, even the mitzvah kalos I value, as sweet as it is. Therefore, how great is the reward that you put away for those who fear you? What is the special schar that Hashem puts away for all of us? That's mitzvahs kalos. Because the mitzvahs kalos means that even though, based on our yardstick, they should not be valued. You know, you have such a trove of accomplishment in life. What you did, you gave a tremendous amount of stuff, you gave this, that. But that you were sensitive to a mitzvah, to another person's needs, you weren't. The question is, why not? For that, seemingly, which neglected mitzvah, which you did attend, that's what you get. That's the schar which is hidden away. No, there's a famous Rambam in Pirush Mishnayos, the last at the end of Sefer Makos. He writes, we say that Hashem gave us an abundance of Torah mitzvahs. Why? Because He wanted to give us the ultimate level of opportunity. Right? That's the reason. We said whenever we study Mishnayos, so the Rambam asks over there, I mean, you would say if you have less mitzvahs to do, it's less likely you're going to fail. Right? Lefikach Hebron Torah mitzvahs. Hashem wanted to bring us merit, therefore He gave us an abundance of Torah mitzvahs. Ratzah Koshmon L'Zakish Yisrael Lefikach Hebron Torah mitzvahs. So Rambam asks, if He wanted to bring us merit, He should give us less mitzvahs, so we'll be able to deal with them more responsibly. If you have so many, it's inevitable you're going to fail. So Rambam says that if one does a mitzvah once in his lifetime, perfectly, you merit that special place in Olam Haba. Once in a lifetime. You may fail endless over all those times, but it's worthwhile to give you all those situations that you may fail for that one moment that you may succeed. If you do that mitzvah b'shleimus, if you do one mitzvah b'shleimus in a lifetime, you merit that special place in the world to come. That's b'shleimus. So what are we talking about? He's saying, David says, how great is the reward that you've hidden away for your recha? That's mitzvahs kalos. That even if you kept the mitzvahs kalos, that's what's hidden away. That's the special schar Hashem has waiting in the world to come. Not for the mitzvah chamura. Not you put on tefillah and you observe Shabbos. It's you attended to something that nobody even notices, nobody pays attention to. Even that you did. Then what? Then you're special. Was the leading Torah sage in his generation. He launched a Muslim movement, and he mentored special students. The famous Rav Zissel of Kelm, the Alt of Kelm, a number of did tremendous things. And it was before Kol Nidre in Kippur. And we were so slanted, it was Vilna. He didn't show up in shul. And nobody could understand, what's going on. Maybe Chas v'Sholom, maybe something happened to him. And then he walks in, and they start Kol Nidre. So they did their investigation. It turned out there was a certain widow in town that nobody was there to help her. deal with her orphans. And she was totally neglected. Rabbi Shoslam held it was more important for him to go deal with this widow with her orphans than be on time for Kol Nidre. And he came just in time for the beginning of the Yom Kippur service. What does that mean? He was sensitive. Nobody else in the community was sensitive. I mean, other people were aware there's a widow. She has orphans. She has no husband to help her. She doesn't have the financial means to deal with whatever she. Why did it be so? The God Lador, he's the one who has to deal with this. The answer is because he has a sensitivity most people don't. He was at a level most people aren't. That's the mitzvah kala we're talking about. That what people neglect, you don't neglect, and that's what you get credit for, and that's what's special in the eyes of Hashem.
Rabbi.